Hi there, welcome back to Painting with Artie Julie on Patreon. Today we'll be looking at doing this Christmassy scene with holly and a little bow using wax and salt and making it slightly abstract. A lot of fun painting this one. Don't forget, on Patreon you'll have not only the full video of this, but also you'll have the instruction sheet and a hint of how to make your own trace down. Let's get going. Okay, right, so we're going to look at this holly wreath now. This is a seasonal thing, which I was trying to get a wintry effect for this holly wreath. On the instruction sheet, you'll see there's two different ways of painting it. One is quite a deliberate, painting every leaf, and just a traditional way of using watercolours. On this one I want to have a go at. It's quite a fun way of working. It's going to be using wax and salt and then working back into it afterwards. So with the salt you just get some, I use coarse ground rock salt. So this is rock salt, and then put it into the salt cellar, and then you can squeeze it out as you want it and just sprinkle it on with that. Table salt is too fine, and rock salt itself, if it's not ground, is too thick, too chunky. And also we want a bit of candle wax. Now this is just a tea light, it's just a simple tea light. I've taken it out of the metal holder, and I can just cut it in half or cut it down into quarters. This will give me some nice little edges to use to get quite sharp points. I'll show you how to use that in a moment. I'll just put that back over there. First of all, we need to think about our design. What I don't want to do is actually do too much drawing onto my watercolour paper. This is Bockingford 300 gram. If you use a bit heavier weight, it's a bit easier if you use a heavier weight paper, a 425 gram, but this is 300 gram. First of all, I need to think about my design, but I don't want to draw too much on this paper. I'm going to use the wax to draw with, but it's really difficult to see where you're going with the wax. So you just need to think about holly leaf shapes first of all, where you're going to put some leaves. So I would rough it out. This is just photocopy paper, just so you can get an idea of what you want to do. So to do a holly leaf, if you draw the centre vein, and then go from point, put some little points on, and back to the point again for one side, and do the same on the other side, point, lift it up, and that gives you holly leaves. So we need to be able to draw a few holly leaves out. Centre vein, point, wiggle, 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 back to the point. This side, wiggle, 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 back to the point. And this gives you the effect of doing holly leaves. So if you just think, I want a couple up there, perhaps 2 or 3 down this side, and this is just planning it in my head really, so I can see where I'm going when I come to do the wax. But I don't want to do this draw too much pencil lines onto my watercolour paper, because you'll see them and it will show through. So this is what we're going to do, just plan a few out, and then we'll do it with the wax. But it's like invisible painting, this is. With holly leaves, when I do this, I can always do one side, but I never get the same the other side. But it's just getting an effect. So just putting those around. You might also want to do some ivy leaves, and with ivy leaves, at the moment, all I'm going to do is the centre veins for them. They're just that, they like crow's feet, that type of thing, with perhaps just a few little dashes off. And then when we come to do the bit around it, it'll just be a few little shapes like that. So just a few lines like that. I want to put a bow or something down the bottom here, so I'll just vaguely do a bow shape and a bit of shape. So that is about the size and the shape, with a few more leaves that I want to aim for on my piece of paper. So now I've planned it in my head, and that's just really to get the idea. I just want to put a little bit of a dotted line around the middle and a bit of a dotted line around the edge. This is where I want to aim to, so I can fit it onto the piece of paper. Now this is going to be really difficult for you to see, because I'm going to use the candle wax on here first of all. Using some of these shapes, I'm just going to draw the shapes with this. You've got to press quite firmly with the candle wax, so it actually leaves marks on the paper. It's no good if it's too light, it won't see anything. So just pressing it down onto the paper. It's quite soft. So I'm just mimicking those shapes that I've seen there, point to point to point, back to the point. So by doing them on a piece of paper first, you vaguely know where you're going to go, but you can't see it, it's invisible. But when you come to put the paint over it, it should make a resist, as they call it, and you will be able to, it'll show up as being quite light in those places. So I'm just bringing those round so the centre point starts on that little dotted line I put there, but you put your leaf on. I forgot which way I was going with my leaf there, and then we'll have another one coming out this way, and a bit more here, and then a few little bits, perhaps a centre vein with another. Oops, I'm going the wrong way with my pointy bits. It's going to be fun doing this because you don't know what you've done until you finish. You might want to have a little practice run on something first to see how hard to press the wax onto the paper, to see what sort of marks it makes. And different types of wax. If it's a thicker one, you'll get thicker lines, but this, if you cut a tea light up, you get nice thin lines with it. And a few little crow's feet here and there to give me the, which will end up being the little bits of the ivy. I've forgotten where I've gone with that one now, but we'll have something here and perhaps a bit over there. Put a bit on the where I think the edges of the bow will come, the top part, and then perhaps a bit coming down here, a little bit on the edge there. That's probably going to be enough. Be careful if you brush this surplus off. If you get it on the floor, your floor goes very slippery, so just be a little bit careful with it. I'll probably leave some of it on there, it doesn't really matter. Right, now I'm going to mix the colours up that I'm going to use for this. So I want some bluey colours, some bluey green colours, so we're going to use ultramarine blue and a touch of yellow, cadmium yellow, a Prussian blue, or an intense blue, or a phthalo blue, with a touch of burnt sienna, reddish brown, gives you just a tiny touch of that colour, gives you a very dark brown, a dark green colour. So that's quite a fun one to use. Perhaps some spots of red, you can use a bit of cadmium red, or some Elysian crimson. So I'm just going to mix those up now, so I can be ready and waiting with them. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've got my colours mixed up, ready and waiting. You don't have to use these colours, you can use some different ones if you want to. And we're going to wet this paper all over so it stays glossy wet. The usual sort of thing now. I think if you've been watching my other videos, you'll know what to expect if we're starting off and we want a wash all over. We're going to put loads and loads of water on so it stays glossy wet. So you can check it by moving your head around or tilting the board. So if you tilt the board so it's on its side, you'll see where there's little dry patches, and otherwise there'll be puddles of water. So you don't want it sitting in puddles. So you can take the surplus off. And just make sure it's staying glossy wet. Now, biggest brush you can coat with. So we don't want this to run everywhere. We just want it to form a circle around this. So we're going to use a bit of blue. Perhaps, it's up to you, and just think perhaps a bluey coloured leaf here, something over that way, and just working round, just putting these different colours in different areas, letting them run. You can see how the wax is resisting the paint in some areas. It's a bit more blue so it matches somewhere around here. This Prussian blue or phthalo blue, it doesn't really matter which, you put some of that next to it, some of it into it. And you can see where the wax is resisting this, and it's just giving it a different effect for those bits. Got to make sure this paper stays nice and wet. So making sure if it starts to dry out, what can be useful is just to spray it with a little bit of water, just to make sure it stays wet while you're waiting for it to run all over the place. So I'm just going a little bit wider with that. So the wax is in the middle here. You can start to see that some of these places the wax is resisting it, but actually I want it just to spread a little bit further beyond the where I've put the wax itself, so you can see there's a different effect there. A little bit round these edges, a little bit more of that colour coming in. to make sure it just run uneven. I'm just jiggling the brush around, making sure it goes a little bit more random. And then perhaps in with some of this Prussian blue and burnt sienna. Again, just think perhaps the odd leaf of that. I think that's a lovely colour. Prussian blue and burnt sienna. It gives you a really strong, dark, vibrant, greeny colour. Building these up. You can start to see holly leaves gradually appearing. Put that in the middle of that leaf, perhaps in this one. It doesn't have to go in the middle of them. You can use different ones. You can use ultramarine blue and a touch of yellow. In fact, I think I'm going to put a bit of that in as well, which I haven't got mixed up. Always mix your colours up so they're ready and waiting. So a bit of greens in there as well. Just brighten it up with a few other patches of colour before it dries out. Making sure this is still nice and wet. As long as it's wet, you can play with it. As soon as it starts to dry out, leave it alone. I'm going to put a bit of red in there as well now. So, and again, the red doesn't really matter whether it's cadmium red or vermilion or something like that, or a bit of Elysian crimson as well. Just put that in where I think the bow's going to be. Let's get that a little bit of the brighter red down here. Somewhere around there is going to be that little bow. Work into that, make that a bit more of a bow shape when it's all dry. And then a few spots of that. Then again, you can just flick it on, or you can dot it on. If you want to flick a bit. It's just having fun with it, really. Just making it as pretty as possible with these nice, bright, strong colours into it. Now, before we finish, we're just going to put a pinch of salt into it. Again, make it look frosty and brightly coloured. Let me just put a bit more red down the bottom here. That's better. It was mixing with some of the other colours. It was going a bit murky. A few more bits of red perhaps here and there. But it's up to you. So take a stand back from it and say, oh, what colours do I need where? Perhaps a bit more greeny colour down here. I'm going to leave it at that. Before I finish completely, a little bit of salt. And the salt just absorbs some of the paint, so around some of these edges I'm just going to put a pinch of salt in. Just 20 grains. If there's any more, it just takes out too much paint. But just a little bit will make it look like snow crystals. I'm just going to take out the surplus one, so just clean my brush, nice clean bit of kitchen roll, and just take out any little puddles. Just put the tip of my brush in. Don't dab it with a kitchen roll, you'll take too much out. If you just take a little bit out, the tip of the brush in, and it just takes out any puddles. And then we're going to leave it to dry. Right, so this is now how it looks after it's dried out. Pretty much, it's still a little bit damp, but it should be all right. So the salt just brushes off, the wax stays there. So now we have to make a bit of sense of this chaos we've got on here with all these mad shapes and things. So now you're going to have to think again now about what shapes you want and where, and enhance them with the same colours that we've used before. If you need to draw the shapes on, it helps you to do that, you can do so. But otherwise we can just work back into these and just encourage them to have a little bit more shaping around the edge. So something like this little leaf here, let's just get a little bit of colour going. We've got a little leaf here which is probably an ivy leaf. So we just need to dampen the main part of that leaf, or where it joins into the rest of the arrangement there. Just dampen that part, or the body of it, and then we can work back in with a bit of the green colour again. On the outside edge where it's dry, just put a bit of that darker colour and just enhance that. Push it back into where you put your water. So it's dry on that bit and dry in the middle, but it's just now, it's a leaf with the veins in it instead of just a blob blurring into the background. So I'm going to work around here. It might not be exactly the same leaves. I might put a few extra ones in. But I'll gradually pick out some of these. There's a leaf shape there just calling out to me to be enhanced a little bit more. But you'll have different ones on yours. So again, with this one, I'm just going to put a little bit of water onto the body of the leaf itself. Put a bit of green, just bring that out, push it back into that water. Don't lose that lovely patterning that you've got there, but just let it blur back into that water. And again, another little leaf suddenly pops out of that arrangement. Working round here, you probably want something in this corner. You might not have any wax there at all. You might just want to put an edge of a holly leaf in or something like that. So I'm just going to wet a patch along there and then get perhaps a nice strong dark bluey green colour, and onto the edge of where I've wetted onto the dry bit, just do a little bit of a holly leaf shape. Doesn't have to be too much at all. So that bit's dry, but it pushes back into the wet there. Just a hint of holly. Yours will all be in different places because you've done different patterns, different shapes with them. It's one which is very difficult to actually make it exactly the same. You can't use a cheat sheet for it. You just have to work with your own creative instincts with this one and just develop this as you go. I'm just going to put a bit of dark into the middle of those leaves, but you don't have to do them all dark. You can use them, leave some of them to be the original colouring showing through, but that one I'm just going to put a bit of dark into the middle of it, a bit of water onto it as well, and you can see how they gradually show out of the picture. Just a few on this side. I think I want a little leaf here, so I'm just going to dampen that part where I want it to blur back into the background again. What colour green shall I use with that one? I think we'll have a bit of the yellow and ultramarine blue just on the outside. Well, that's a little bit too bright a green. I add a bit more blue to that, get a bit more bluey coloured, and then just touch it back into the water. And let it just sit there. That's a little bit more water on so it blends back in. Perhaps one or two of these around here. Perhaps I have another little ivy leaf. I'll use this one a different colour, the Prussian blue and burnt sienna mix. So it's plenty of blue, tiny little bit of burnt sienna. Gives me a dark green colour. Again, a bit of water on first, even if it's a bit grubby. But then onto the dry bits, just pull those out and give them the shaping of a three-lobed ivy leaf, or you could have it as a holly leaf if you wanted to. Perhaps something down this corner. Again, background ones, because these show up quite well. So I might just have a background holly leaf. So this one I'm just going to do point, point, point. Fill it in. That's onto dry paper. Leave a little centre vein dry. And then just put a few little pointy bits on the other side. A little holly leaf half comes out of the waxed area. Perhaps one of those up here as well. Let's show you that one again. So get my blue colour, or the bluey colour, onto the dry paper this time. We'll have a centre line, point to point to point, fill it in. Let's move that over a bit. Just dragging that little puddle around, let it fade away. From that point to the other side of the centre line, the centre vein, and then just put a few points onto it and let it fade back in. Bit of water onto the bottom, let it blur back into the picture here. There's a little leaf here. Let's have a greeny one for that one. Little ivy leaf sticking out there. Onto the little 3 points for the little ivy leaf. Fill it in a bit, and then the back end of it we'll just blur into the background here. So a bit of water, so a bit more of the green onto that. Just pushing that around a bit. I'm not too unhappy with that so far. We'll put a few berries on. It's a nice bright red for the berries. Again, just on some of these clusters, we might just want some little round shapes here. And that's just onto the dry paper. There's probably a bit of wax sitting on there. A few more perhaps over here where it's a bit darker. Just onto the dry paper. A few berries sticking out. I always try and keep odd numbers when I'm doing things like this. It makes it look a bit of balanced picture. A few more over there. A bit more on the red. That red really sings with the rest of the colouring, a little bit here and there, just the odd little bit to pull out little corners underneath some of these little leaves perhaps. And then it's just the bow we need to add a little bit to. We need to just add a little bit of stronger red to the bow itself. So I'm just right bit on the top there. Bright bit on the top. So that's the cadmium red or vermilion, something like that. Perhaps a little bit more of that just underneath, so where I've got a little bit of wax there. If you haven't got wax, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have it. And then a little bit of darker into that to make it look like it's the inside. So it's a darker red, the alizarin crimson into the inside bits. And then just a few little bits for the bits of ribbon hanging down, coming out from the underside of the bow. I don't think I want to do too much more to it than that. It's up to you. You can keep adding leaves on, you can keep adding little different shapes on, perhaps a little half of something here. Just go onto dry paper, put a little bit of holly showing out. I might just add a little bit of green to the centre of that holly, where let the wax do the shape. You can start to make the shapes show up a bit more. Perhaps in the middle of that one. Perhaps in the middle of this one. But I'm saying let it be slightly abstract and go back to being the little shapes there. I think that's just about does it. I think I'll leave it at that.